Hi, everybody. I'm Robert Hackett, senior writer at Fortune, also co-founder of The Ledger, our fintech crypto vertical. And it's a pleasure to be here with Nadav Zafrir and Tom Glocer. Nadav, he was formerly the commander of Unit 8200 in the Israeli Defense Forces, which is commonly referred to as the Israeli NSA for people here in America. It's sort of the equivalent. He also co-founded or founded the Israeli Cyber Command, and he runs an investment firm and startup accelerator called Teammate right now. Tom Glocer, former CEO of Thomson Reuters, and also on the board of directors at Merck and Morgan Stanley. You also run a couple of investment firms.
Yep.
So let's jump into it. We're talking about security and crypto. And to get the elephant out of the room or whatever, you know, Binance got hacked the other week. Do we have any Binance customers on the floor? Raise your hand if you're a Binance customer. Okay, we've got quite a few. So this is a problem that people have encountered in the world of cryptocurrency. Hacking and crypto seem to go together like two peas in a pod. Nadav, maybe you can lay out the challenge for us here. We don't often hear about big banks getting hacked all the time, though they're not immune to it. But it seems like crypto exchanges are constantly under fire.
Hi, good morning. Well, yeah, I mean, it's going after the cryptocurrency is almost the perfect crime. If you guys remember the Sutton rule, Willie Sutton in the 70s, when they asked him why he robs banks, his answer was very simple: because that's where the money is. So the money is still in banks, but it's also in cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are the perfect crime because once you get access to the key and sign the ledger, it's game over. And so if you look at the last 20 years of cybercrime, you know, it started by one-offs. So somebody would, hack your account for a specific person, steal your credit card credentials, and then they would have to go and sell it on the black market. Then they started doing it en masse, like at the Target case, which is a little bit better. You get 70 million credit cards at once. You sell them on the black market in blocks. It's not as easy as you think. So it's hard. You have to get in, you have to find the central repository of information, then you have to go to the black market, you have to sell it. It's hard work. What we're seeing in the last couple of years are a little bit more clever attacks where the customer is actually the victim. So if you're in an extortion attack, I have your information, give me money, I'll pay you back. I don't have to go to the black market and sell it. The victim is my client. Cryptocurrencies, total new play field where once I get access, it's game over, and it's all centralized in one place in the exchanges. And so we shouldn't be surprised that this is happening. Wherever there is an engineering, procedure, human process, there are people on the other sides that understand the engineering, the human process, and take care and just take advantage of it. So that's where we're at.
Tom, I've got to ask too, you invest in a lot of these cryptocurrency companies, but you're on the board at Morgan Stanley. There's a popular meme in the crypto world, which is, short the bankers and long Bitcoin. So where do you fall on this? How can you justify this?
I think that's a pretty bad trade, at least at the moment. So I obviously don't speak, I'm the lead director at Morgan Stanley, but don't speak for the company. But I speak to a lot of others in, let's call it the more mature industry, the Fidelities, the Goldmans, the JP Morgans of the world. So I don't think it's so much a one versus the other. I think the larger banks all feel that they can be fast followers, that the right strategy at the moment is not to take your entire equities franchise and suddenly push it onto the blockchain because of the inefficiency, because of the security issues, because of the environmental impact as well, but rather to run a series of controlled experiments, right? So everyone's aware of the innovator's dilemma problem. Everyone's aware that if you ignore it forever, one day it sneaks up on you and it may be too late. So I think what you see lots of banks doing are running small experiments. Societe Generale did a small euro bond doing the whole issuance on blockchain, not because they're about to turn over their entire fixed income business, but because they want to understand how it works, they want to play with the technology, they want to question. And I think for the moment, that's what you'll see the large institutions doing.
So tell us, where are you placing your bets then?
So I've tended not to invest in coin at all. I have absolutely no idea why Bitcoin or another coin would go up or down, although I do notice somewhat cynically that the value has trended up in the couple of weeks before this conference. And what would I invest in? Number one, I hope you're listening, Consensus. Anyone who puts on blockchain Bitcoin conferences, I would like to buy an equity position. I think it's the single best play at the moment on crypto.
Any consensus organizers in the house?
What I do invest in is security, in efficiency, throughput, and cost. So there's an Israeli company called Starkware. In transparency, Alchemy.io. So tackling, what are the real barriers today? What are the obstacles to adoption? Security, cost, scaling, and environmental impact.
Nadav, tell us some about the bets that you've placed recently.
So at Teammate, what we do is we try to identify promising technologies, what the impact might be, what's broken today, and every once in a while, what do we think will break tomorrow? And I think blockchain is a perfect example. Once we identify these technologies and what's about to break, we bring together investors that are strategic about it and help us figure out where exactly the pain is, what are the best technologies out there that can solve it. Specifically with blockchain, our bet is we started a company that's called Curve. I'm the chairman of the company. And what Curve does very simply is it eliminates the single point of failure in the blockchain, and specifically today for cryptocurrencies. So instead of playing with the attackers on the same playing field, if you like, where it's always a cat and mouse situation, and the stakes are very high, because of the signing mechanisms on the chain, we went to another plane, or off-chain if you like, and we're using mathematical concepts, in this case multi-party computation, which eliminate the use of private keys altogether. And that's what Curve is doing.
For people who don't know, multi-party computation, give us just a quick sort of soundbite.
It's a subfield in cryptography that allows you to compute on data or share data without actually exposing it. So in the blockchain scenario, instead of having a string, which is my key, that I now have to store either in a safe underground with armed guards, literally, or split it and give one piece to my dog and another piece to my grandma, and then try to bring them together whenever I need to sign something. What we're doing is creating shares that in themselves mean nothing, and only when those shares come together and there is a consensus off-chain, we can actually create the transaction and sign the blockchain. The beauty of this is that it takes it to a totally new mathematical cryptography field, and so for the attackers, this creates an exponentially higher challenge. Because we're able to do this, we are also introducing, actually just announced a couple of days ago, that we're joining forces or have joined forces with Munich Re, which is one of our investors at Teammate, the largest reinsurer in the world, to actually secure, not only secure, but also create the insurance, so secure and insure transactions using the Curve technology for up to $50 million per user. And the ability to do this is, again, by taking it off-chain, creating something which is substantially different than the way the chain is signed today.
How have you managed to convince a big insurance company like Munich Re that this is okay, that you guys handle risk effectively, especially in a world where you see what happens at Binance and Quadriga CX?
Right, so this goes back to the Teammate process. We, as investors, we don't look for entrepreneurs or ideas. We hunt for trouble. So we don't have a deal flow of startups coming in and saying, this is my idea, but rather we join forces with giants like Munich Re, Walmart, Microsoft, Cisco, Moody's, Temasek, SoftBank, and others. And we literally have a roundtable where our research team talks to their research teams, and together we try to identify big trouble. In this case, our design partner for building this from scratch on the exploration, ideation, and finally validation is Munich Re. So they're a part of the engineering of this. Their auditors went through the mathematics of this, and this gives them the ability to introduce this $50 million per person insurance, and this is just the beginning. We're actually, as of this week, also joining forces with Genesis, which is the largest OTC in the market, that will actually implement the Curve infrastructure for their blockchain capabilities.
So Tom, you're an early investor in Coinbase, which has a custodian product that they're pitching very hard right now.
Yep.
How does this mesh with something like Curve, which purports to give you better security through the way they handle key management?
I think it's very complementary. I mean, when I invested in Coinbase, which must have been, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, it to me was the best play on infrastructure. They had more or less the only software wallet at the time, and were building out exchange-like infrastructure. Now, just looking at the list of exhibitors, there are a ton of approaches. So my view is it's very consistent. I would hope that they would think about adopting Curve, because Curve is fundamental technology. It's just better math, and therefore, you know, I think once people really do the work, and obviously, you know, I'm not competent enough in math to decide whether this is zero knowledge-based proof is better than another, but folks do have these people available. Your last panel was pretty wonky here, and I think when they do and put side by side public-private key versus something sort of an order of magnitude more secure, they will begin working with Curve. Or maybe Curve will have a competitor, who knows?
So as mentioned, you invested very early in Coinbase. What caught your eye? What got you excited about the world of cryptocurrency in the early days?
So, you know, I've done a lot around I think about the issue of the application of technology generically to business problems. And I think quite often you get a solution in search of a problem. And people were, you know, heralding Bitcoin as the greatest, most amazing thing, because it would be an inflation hedge, because there was a limit on the total amount that could ever be minted. And maybe because I began my operating career at Reuters in Latin America, the idea that you could have a new currency didn't seem so amazing, since Argentina and Brazil created new currencies all the time. What did seem really interesting to me was, number one, the idea of a distributed ledger. Number two, really the idea that you could take trust from a single entity and distribute trust out. And then third, the audit trail, the brilliant way of linking the hashes such that you could really trust the audit trail. And so for me, I thought there would be a ton of interesting long-term applications for blockchain and side chains, including in really boring areas of the world like clearing and settlement of securities, where the current practice that historically has always been everybody keeps their own ledger, in effect, their own books and records, and reconciles to a trusted authority, let's say DTCC in equities. But the idea that you could have a world where if everyone were publishing onto the blockchain and no new block could get written with a series of new, let's say, equity trades without the consensus, then in theory, everyone is instantly reconciled. You don't have separate heterogeneous books, and you don't have the fail trades, don't knows, incompatible symbology that you get today. So all of that struck me as a pretty neat thing, and so I punted on it.
I'm quite interested to hear about your past in Latin America. I happen to know that Brian Armstrong spent some formative time there, which led him to get excited about Bitcoin as well. Did you connect with him over that? Or?
I didn't, although Wenceslas Caceres, I invested in his last company, or his first company in Latin America, which was a media company called Star Media, and then he became one of the early zealots and promoters of Bitcoin, which was neat, and I caught up with him a number of years ago. But Latin America is an interesting place. It's dangerous, it's volatile, it's also very rich culturally and historically, and people are willing to experiment. So I think that it's sort of a natural. We will see, I would guess, it'll take a long time for the US Federal Reserve or the ECB to put out a bit dollar or a bit euro. Putting out a bit peso or a bit real, I think may come sooner, or maybe they'll just take the Paxos stablecoin and declare that's the bit real.
So it's not lost on me that you also grew up in Ecuador, Nadav.
I did.
Am I just making up correlations here, or is there something to this?
Well, I don't know. What I do know is that when you grow up in a remote place that has a very volatile political system, uncertainty, you realize that some of these technologies, especially in the world that we live in today, are in dire need. We need more transparency. We need more efficiency. We need ways to fight crime in a better way. And when blockchain came out, it seemed like that's going to solve a lot of these problems. Ironically, we're in a state where, because of the nascent stage of cryptocurrencies, it's now almost synonymous with crime. I think that doesn't have to be that way. We can solve that, and by eliminating a single point of failures, we can create a more secure environment, which will invite institutions to join this. And again, so what we're trying to do is create more transparency by more security, by creating an insurable cryptocurrency that will invite institutions to join this game. And I think this will also make regulators more comfortable with these kinds of technologies, which I think we direly need.
Here's a curveball question for you. We've seen some massive global worldwide cyber attacks happen over the past few years, NotPetya being an example of that in 2017, the ransomware attack. People like to talk about how blockchains can secure stuff pretty well because it distributes it across a whole network. But a lot of these machines are uniform. They're kind of coming from the same places. And it strikes me that if you had a sort of critical failure in one of these machines that gets used to support the blockchain, that could sort of fall like a whole bunch of dominoes and cause the same sort of kind of thing we've seen with NotPetya and other global cyber attacks recently. How credible is that threat?
I think it's very credible. What we've been seeing in the last, look, if you look at the last 20 years, something very simple happened. The world went from not connected to connected at around 2000. Technologies that were developed by nation states, like the internet, like global positioning systems, packet switching, the internet, of course, became available to everyone. The world went, boom, connected. And then around less than a decade later, the world became hyper-connected with smartphones and the cloud and Wi-Fi. And today we're at the stage of cross-connectivity, which goes beyond hyper-connectivity. That is, we're seeing physical connecting to the virtual. We're seeing biotech connecting to IT. In essence, there's a very simple term that we need to understand, which is the attack surface. As the world went from connected to hyper-connected to cross-connected, the attack surface for the attackers grew exponentially, giving the attackers so much more opportunities to leverage or to breach or to take advantage of this hyper-connectivity and today cross-connectivity. So that's where we are. The other trend that we're seeing worldwide is that criminal groups are adopting nation-state capabilities very fast. In the case of NotPetya, that's what we've seen. We see an exploit that somehow found its way out of the NSA. Allegedly, the Russians used it on an attack on the Ukraine, and boom, we have companies like Merck and Maersk and Saint-Gobain and others, shut for a couple of days or weeks. So when we think about blockchain technologies, that's just another part of the curve of the attack surface growing exponentially and defensive measures growing much slower, hence creating a gap where attackers come in and manipulate the systems. So what we need to do is think about the cyber piece whenever we think about a new technology, whenever we think about big data and machine learning coming together, whenever we think about trends in the blockchain, we need to think about the cyber by design. We need to think about security by design, trying to anticipate how attackers are going to go after it. That's a situation where the good news is that we have technologies, in this case, based on deep math that has been researched in the last decade and come to fruition in the last couple of years that allows us to use cryptographic philosophies or cryptographic capabilities, in this case, multi-party computations, in other cases, homomorphic encryption, which allows us to share data or to share signing the blockchain in this case without actually exposing one single point of failure, which in the blockchain case is a string or a key that once is obtained by the attackers, it's game over. Once we take the attackers to a new playing field, we'll start closing the gap of the attack surface, and these technologies will move much faster than you think. I mean, if you think about it, I think Bill Gates said once, whenever there's a new technology, we have very high expectations and we are disillusioned in the first 2 years, and then we can't believe what happens in the 10 years after. I think that's where we are right now, and I think we're at the cusp of finding these new technologies, these new procedures, in this case MPC, that will skyrocket the use of blockchain.
Given your extensive experience in intelligence agencies and nation-state work, what is the most pressing, frightening sort of threat that has come across your radar you think people should be thinking about?
Trust. In one word, trust. We're now in a world where it's very hard for us to trust the simple things that, as we were growing up, my generation, we were accustomed to trust our democracies, right? Voting systems. Can we trust our voting systems? Well, how many of you 100% trust that the next elections in the US will be 100% legit? 20 years ago, most of the people in the room would say probably yes. For the next elections, we're concerned. News, fake news. When we watch a reporter, when we read an article that you're writing, do we actually know it's you? I don't know if you're aware of this, but you can now take 3.7 seconds of somebody's voice recording and actually impersonate them to sound exactly like that person. So trust is in the midst of what we're in dire need of promoting right now. Again, the irony is that the blockchain has a great potential to offer that, and yet has become synonymous with almost the opposite. I believe that by understanding the attacker's mindset, which is what we're doing. I came from about 25 years in the Israeli military. My last 10 years were in 8200. We think we really understand how attackers think. We know that at the end of the day, attackers are human. They're ROI driven. They're not super ninjas or superhumans. They have their limitations. They have their vulnerabilities. What we need to find is how we flip that asymmetry. It's an asymmetric battle when the attackers only need to find one single point of failure in the whole system, and it's game over. Hence, if we take that single point of failure, distribute it in a way where attackers now need to hack everybody simultaneously and get everybody's consensus, we're flipping the asymmetry, taking control of the situation.
Tom, given the threat environment that we live in today, if you happen to be advising a big Wall Street bank, where would you tell them to invest their dollars in terms of cybersecurity?
Well, I think it's a matter of public record that Morgan Stanley spends about $400 million a year just on cyber defense and hires the very best people out of NSA, GCHQ, 8200 as well. Nadav and I are partners in a company called Bluevoyant that I co-founded with actually the former chief operating officer at Morgan Stanley. And our remit in part is to help not only banks, but all companies that can't spend $400 million on cyber defense, can't possibly hope to hire somebody of Nadav's structure, but they've got Swift codes, they've got payment instructions flying around. So what do you do for, the average bank around the country, let alone in Europe and Asia, which is sort of one step behind just because they've started a bit later?
So I've been reading your blog a little bit, which is an excellent blog. I recommend it for people. But you wrote a post recently called "Who Should Own Your Data?" And so I'd pose that question to you: who should own your data?
Yeah, I was musing there about some of the further out thinking around dApps, distributed applications, and whether ultimately there wasn't an interesting blockchain solution. Coming back to what I was saying earlier about it sometimes looking to me like a solution in search of a problem, there are, I always appreciate companies who have thought rigorously about why am I using a centralized NoSQL database and why would I use a distributed ledger? What are the underlying reasons? So among the reasons in the own my own data is how do I have an indelible record and how do I achieve micropayments on an efficient basis? And so the idea would be that we'd all walk around with a secure wallet, in effect, a vault of personal information, more likely an index that points to multiple vaults. Hopefully they'll all be secured by Curve. And rather than the current situation where we just weren't paying attention and Google, Facebook, et cetera, built up huge caches of our private information, you would have the choice to, let's say, sell Google your search history in return for a micropayment, or sell Apple your photos in return for a micropayment, et cetera. And so I think it's an interesting way of turning the current model on its head, but we're not going to get there without some very significant government intervention along the lines that, the debate's been raging around Facebook, because tech alone won't achieve this jujitsu move.
Speaking of Facebook, I've got to ask, Chris Hughes, one of the co-founders, wrote a piece the other day about how the government should break up Facebook. Where do you land on that?
I thought it was very courageous of him. I read it, and I like him. He's very thoughtful. As he pointed out, Zuckerberg and Sheryl are not ogres either. They're kind, well-intentioned people, but after a while, when you build something like this, you just believe your own side of everything. We're not evil, therefore everything we do is good. I think actually, just breaking up Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp won't be enough, right? Because, with Facebook having whatever it is, 2.5 billion folks, if you really wanted to go after them, I think you'd have to go deeper and go at, essentially declare a date by which they'd have to, in effect, erase all of the data they've achieved to date and start fresh with what I'd call an informed consent and maybe, yes, micropayments.
This is in addition to breaking up Facebook or instead of breaking up Facebook?
Well, I think you could do it instead, right? There's no intrinsic reason why it's awful that they own Instagram and WhatsApp, although they do seem to be rushing to clean up and converge the back ends to make it harder to break them up. But I think if Mark came out and just declared that June 30 of next year, we are going to wipe out our histories. Here's your chance to download your own in case you want to keep it. And here are the new rules of the road that you get to explicitly opt into. I would leave all those companies in his world.
I know this kind of diverted from the security topic, but how many people here think Facebook should be broken up? Raise your hand. Okay.
Wow.
There's some.
Yeah, about a third.
Well, that's all we've got time for. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you both to my panelists. I hope you all took something away from this conversation, and enjoy the rest of the day.